Hello and welcome back, everyone. It's me, Vexen Cat, and today we'll be reading Pride and Prejudice. I'm sorry, Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. I have a note here with a number of books that um, Jane has written. Oddly enough, she published a lot of them anonymously and didn't get a lot of credit until well after the fact. But I am Vexen Cat. I am your local librarian, tiger librarian, and I am excited to be here. It's been a weird week. As you can see, I did an overhaul. We went with a autumn theme, so we're kind of transitioning into fall, with it being September now. I really wanted to showcase the fall colors because during the month of October, I will be celebrating all things Halloween, and that means that entire month will be witchy and vampire and Dracula and all things horror based, from the books that I read to the games that I play, um, and the overall aesthetic of my VTuber for reading. Yes, all the spooky vibes. So I really only get fall for this month and possibly November, but if you're not familiar, I am from Alaska, so right around Halloween thereabouts I usually get snow. So winter is 100% here at the end of October in Alaska. So today we're going to talk about Jane Austen very briefly. I'm trying to streamline these beginning intros about specific authors. We're going to read Sense and Sensibility, which is a story about two sisters that have to learn that in order to find personal happiness, they have to find a mixture of both sense and common sense and sensibility, and find where that happiness lies in society, where status and money govern everything, including the rules of love. Now, Jane Austen was born in December of 1775. Let's see, do I have a picture of here? Bear with me. Oh, I forgot to grab that picture. All right, so while I grab that, I'll do some more reading. So Jane was born in 1775 and passed away in 1817 at 41 years of age, which is relatively young, all things considered, but I don't know. If you compare her to the era in which that she was living, perhaps 41 wasn't too young to be passing away. I mean, it is by modern standards by all means. Open a new tab. England. There we go. Jane. There we go. So Jane Austen here. This is an artist rendering of Jane Austen. She's primarily known for her 6 English novels, of which are, where is my list of those? Figures. The list of her known works: published in 1811, Sense and Sensibility, followed by Pride and Prejudice in 1813, Mansfield Park in 1814, Emma in 1816. After she passed away, she was in the middle of writing another novel in 1817. So posthumously, they published The Northanger Abbey, Persuasion, Lady Susan, and a number of her juvenile writings from when she was a kid. So she is the quintessential gentrified lady that was educated at Oxford with her sister Cassandra. She had 2 older brothers. Her family her father was George Austen, who was the rector of an Anglican parish in Steventon and Dean. The Reverend Austen came from an old, gentrified, wealthy family of wool merchants. As each generation of eldest sons received inheritances, George's branch of the family fell into poverty. He and his two sisters were orphaned as children and had to be taken in by relatives. By the time he was 15, George, her father, um, his like George's sister Philadelphia was apprenticed as a milliner in Covent Garden. At the age of 16, George entered St. John's College in Oxford, where he most likely met his wife, Cassandra Lay. She came from another prominent family, the Lay family. Her father was a rector at the All Souls College in Oxford, and she grew up among gentry. Her eldest brother, James, inherited the family fortune and a large estate from his great aunt Perrot, um, with the only condition that he changed his name from Lay to Lay Perrot. So in 1783, when Jane and her sister Cassandra were sent to Oxford, um, they were educated by Mrs. Anne Cawley, who took them to Southampton later that year in 1783. In that autumn, both girls were sent home after catching typhus, of which Jane unfortunately died. So, Jane Austen nearly died. My apologies. She was mostly home educated and attended boarding school with her sister up until 1785, and she went to the Reading Abbey Girls' School, ruled by Mrs. La Tournelle. The curriculum probably included French, spelling, needlework, dancing, music and drama, and other ladylike pursuits. In 1786, they returned home because the fees for schooling were too high and the Austen family couldn't afford them any longer. And after that, starting in 1786, she never, quote, never again lived anywhere beyond the bounds of her immediate family environment, unquote. Her education came from reading, guided by her father and brothers, both James and Henry. Irene said that Austen used some of the same school books as the boys. Austen apparently had unfettered access to both her father's library and that of their family friend Warren Hastings. Together, these collections of books amounted to a large and varied library and education. Her father was also very tolerant of Jane's risque experiments in writing and provided that for both she and her sister, expensive paper and other materials in order to further their writing and drawing pursuits. So we are reading Sense and Sensibility, which, as I said before, was produced or published in 1811. I am pretty excited to get into this because this has been on my to-read list for some time, as is Pride and Prejudice. There's a few of these books of hers that I've been wanting to read. I wanted to start with something a little more gentrified, homey. I've been reading all of these adventurous summer books, and I wanted something a little bit more cozy going into the fall. So I thought Jane Austen would be a good fit. This week has been a very, very busy week with making all of these separate scenes for streaming and making assets like a whole new weekly schedule, and starting to make my Halloween PNG tuber, and just all of these things. So I've been a lot busier than I had originally planned, in addition to taking on a lot more exercise and going into this fall. I pulled in a million directions. So, cooks, let's see, let's do some hellos and welcomes in to everyone. We've got Fallen is here, and we got Apache Bro, welcome in. Valis, of course, hello. Void Baron Jules, hi Jules, how's it going? Grim, hello. And Cooks 1903. Sense and Sensibility, My Old Enemy. I had to read this entire thing and write multiple essays and have never truly recovered. Oh dear. Having seasons in the books is a cute idea, yes. A novel idea, perhaps? I know. I should be ashamed. Yes. I do a lot of various things. Some of it's programming, some of it's art. Oh no. We might have to try that one again, Fallen. I'm not sure that I had that one. The Mix It Up is not logged in properly. Of course. If it's not scuffed, is it even VTubing? Honestly. I'll give you a 6.5 out of 10 on the hag joke scale. Fair. Fair. Yeah. I'm still not sure how I feel about the whole hag versus geezer. Anybody, what is it, over the age of 25 is, basically 1 foot in the grave, I think is how it works out. You'll let it slide. Thank you. But we've got the new fall text chat. It's a little hard to see because I'm kind of covering it up a little bit. I can shrink that down a little. I'm so tiny. So I went through and I made this. I can swap between the seasons. We can go winter. We can go spring. We can go back to summer. So all of it. We can have nothing. Into the void. 25 plus is a Christmas cake and 30 plus are hags. Yeah. Get into the seasons. I've always been a big fan of all the various seasons for various reasons. I mean, I think of sun and summer and heat, and then I think in fall I think of hot cocoa and cider and fire. And then in winter, of course, it's snow and sculptures and ice and all things schnapps. And of course, spring is freshness, blossoms, fluttery birds and things just starting their lives together. Being so orange coated, don't like pumpkin spice lattes in autumn. I do. I, in fact, quite enjoy pumpkin spice lattes. Aw, Hikara. Oh, Hikara! Jiminy Crickets! Oh my goodness. Thank you. Thank you very much. 10? 10. Oh my goodness. You must have had a whole backlog of past due books. My goodness. Right? Wow. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Higara. Yes, I do in fact like pumpkin spice lattes. There's a couple of dupes out there because I personally try whenever possible not to support Starbucks, but that's just me. And I'm not going to get into the politics of why, but I do not like their things. I don't like anti-union. I don't like some of the way they treat their employees. I don't like what they put their money into. I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, but today we're gonna read Sense and Sensibility, and I'm pretty excited. I have a couple of illustrations through the book. This one was done, that are done by Hugh Thompson. This particular cover is from the, I believe, 1868 edition. So well after Jane had perished, unfortunately. And Terrace, Apache Bro, enjoy your subs. I hope you enjoy the emotes. Yeah, sorry about that. I took several books out and I forgot to bring them all back. Library dues. What can you do? Yes, I really like. This is actually from an entire box set of their work. Jane Austen has her 6 novels were all done in this tooled deep red leather with the gold leafing on it, and I think they did a really good job with it. Okay, we're all here. We're 15 minutes, 17 minutes past the hour. Let's get started on the book. I don't know what the pacing is. The first stream of any new book tends to give me a gauge on the style of writing and how quickly I can read. There's some rather loquacious, verbose authors that I think I was slogging through at maybe 30 pages just because of language, word choice, just the way the dialect fit together. Oh yeah, feel free to use an exclamation point lurk. A lot of people do. I'm just reading, so things tend to be rather chill, unless I get excited about a particularly interesting part of the book. Yeah, we has wandered into the Do Not Disturb section of the library. We hope you enjoy the ambience. In the meantime, thank you for lurking. I should make that an audio. Another day. Okay. So, this beautiful edition, I don't have the cover from this edition. This is the one that was produced. Oh, thank you, anonymous gifter. I appreciate the sub. And before and Bean Daddy? I hope you enjoy your sub and the subsequent emotes. So I wanted to read this editor's note at the beginning of this edition of Sense and Sensibility. It is a great deal to earn for so little trouble, was Jane Austen's comment when she received the £150 for Sense and Sensibility, the first of her novels to be published. The story was written in 1797, but 14 years elapsed before it was printed. Its success was immediate and so emphatic that more was demanded of the author. Pride and Prejudice, her earliest completed novel, which had been rejected and laid aside since 1797, was produced in 1813. Mansfield Park in the next year, and Emma in 1816, all of them being issued anonymously. Sense and Sensibility was an enlargement of an earlier story, Eleanor and Marianne, written in the form of letters. This style of fiction, dealing with simple country life, with characters in their everyday garb and surroundings, appealed at once by its very simplicity and delightful freshness. Jane Austen's position in literature was placed somewhat highly by her contemporary critics. Sir Walter Scott wrote of her, quote, "That young lady had a talent for describing the involvements, feelings, and characters of ordinary life, which is to me the most wonderful I ever met with. The big bow wow I can do myself, like anyone going. But the exquisite touch which readers ordinary commonplace things and characters interesting from the truth of the description and the sentiment is denied to me." Unquote. While Macaulay placed her nearest to Shakespeare in the exhibition of human nature by means of dialogue, Jane Austen was born at Steventon in 1775 and died at Winchester in 1817. Now, this is the editor's note. This would have come from Castle and Company Limited. I'm not sure who the editor was, but from this edition, it was their observation and their note. So, this particular edition was submitted to the Harvard College Library in 1930 by Mrs. Harriet J. Bradbury. Sense and Sensibility, Chapter 1. The family of Dashwood had been long settled in Sussex. Their estate was large, and their residence was at Norland Park, in the centre of their property, where for many generations they had lived in so respectable a manner as to engage the general good opinion of their surrounding acquaintance. The late owner of this estate was a single man who lived to a very advanced age, and for many years of his life had a constant companion and housekeeper in his sister. But her death, which happened 10 years before his own, produced a great alteration in his home, for to supply her loss he invited and received into his house the family of his nephew, Mr. Henry Dashwood, the legal inheritor of the Norland estate, and the person to whom he intended to bequeath it. In the society of his nephew and niece and their children, the old gentleman's days were comfortably spent. His attachment to them all increased. The constant attention of Mr. and Mrs. Henry Dashwood to his wishes, which proceeded not merely from interest but from goodness of heart, gave him every degree of solid comfort which his age could receive. And the cheerfulness of the children added a relish to his existence. By a former marriage, Mr. Henry Dashwood had one son. Wait, what is this? Rewards fall damage emote? Huh, hope chest. I guess I get a new emote? Alright, Twitch. Pop off. Wild. And the cheerfulness of the children added a relish to his existence. By a former marriage, Mr. Henry Dashwood had one son, by his present lady 3 daughters. The son, a steady, respectable young man, was amply provided for by the fortune of his mother, which had been large, and half of which devolved on him on his coming of age. By his own marriage, likewise, which happened soon afterwards, he added to his wealth. To him, therefore, the succession to the Norland estate was not so really important as to his sisters, for their fortune, independent of what might arise to them from their fathers inheriting that property, could be but small. Their mother had nothing, and their father only £7,000 in his own disposal. For the remaining moiety. Moiety. I'm guessing it's moiety. 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 A half, an indefinite portion, part, or share, or anthropology, one of 2 units into which a tribe or community is divided on the basis of unilineal descent. I'm guessing it's this last one. Moiety. Quick word. There we go. Moiety. The more you know. For the remaining moiety of his first wife's fortune was also secured to her child, and he had only a life interest in it. The old gentleman died. His will was read, and like almost every other will, gave as much disappointment as pleasure. He was neither so unjust nor so ungrateful as to leave his estate from his nephew, but he left it to him on such terms as destroyed half the value of the bequest. Mr. Dashwood had wished for it more for the sake of his wife and daughters than for himself or his son. But to his son and his son's son, a child of 4 years old, it was secured, in such a way as to leave to himself no power of providing for those who were most dear to him and who most needed a provision, by any charge on the estate, or by any sale of its valuable woods. The whole was tied up for the benefit of this child, who, in occasional visits with his father and mother at Norland, had so far gained on the affections of his uncle by such attractions as are by no means unusual in children of 2 or 3 years old. An imperfect articulation, an earnest desire of having his own way, many cunning tricks, and a great deal of noise, as to outweigh all the value of all the attention which, for years, he had received from his niece and her daughters. He meant not to be unkind, however, and as a mark of his affection for the 3 girls, he left them £1,000 apiece. Mr. Dashwood's disappointment was at first severe, but his temper was cheerful and sanguine, and he might reasonably hope to live many years, and by living economically lay by a considerable sum from the produce of an estate already large and capable of almost immediate improvement. But the fortune, which had been so tardy in coming, was only 1 12-month. He survived his uncle no longer, and £10,000, including the late legacies, was all that remained for his widow and daughters. His son was sent for as soon as his danger was known, and to him Mr. Dashwood recommended, with all the strength and urgency which illness could command, the interest of his mother-in-law and sisters. Mr. John Dashwood had not the strong feelings of the rest of the family, but he was affected by a recommendation of such a nature at such a time, and he promised to do everything in his power to make them comfortable. His father was rendered easy by such an assurance, and Mr. John Dashwood had then leisure to consider how much there might prudently be in his power to do for them. He was not an ill-disposed young man, unless to be rather cold-hearted, and rather selfish is to be ill-disposed. But he was, in general, well respected, for he conducted himself with propriety in the discharge of his ordinary duties. Had he married a more amiable woman, he might have been made still more respectable than he was. He might even have been made amiable himself, for he was very young when he married, and very fond of his wife. But Mrs. John Dashwood was a strong caricature of himself, more narrow-minded and selfish. Robo-edit. How does your dictionary bot work? Super cool. Actually, it is, I just go to the page, the dictionary.com page, which is, I believe, Webster Dictionary. And then I have a, what would I call this? A bot, I guess. The Biku bot. I have the exclamation point word to keep track of. It's like a counter. It keeps track of how many times I've had to consult a word since I installed the bot. Yeah. Thank you very much. When he gave his promise to his father, he meditated within himself to increase the fortune of his sisters by the present of £1,000 apiece, He then really thought himself equal to it. The prospect of 4,000 a year in addition to his present income, besides the remaining half of his own mother's fortune, warmed his heart and made him feel capable of generosity. Yes, he would give them £3,000. It would be liberal and handsome. It would be enough to make them completely easy. £3,000. He could spare so considerable a sum with little inconvenience. He thought of it all day long, and for many days successively. And he did not repent. No sooner was his father's funeral over than Mrs. John Dashwood, without sending any notice of her intention to her mother-in-law, arrived with her child and their attendants. No one could dispute her right to come. The house was her husband's from the moment of his father's decease, but the indelicacy of her conduct was so much the greater, and to a woman in Mrs. Dashwood's situation, with only common feelings, must have been highly unpleasing. But in her mind there was a sense of honor so keen, a generosity so romantic, that any offense of the kind, by whomsoever given or received, was to her a source of immovable disgust. Mrs. John Dashwood had never been a favorite with any of her husband's family, but she had no opportunity, till the present, of shewing them with how little attention to the comfort of her other people she could act when occasion required it. So acutely did Mrs. Dashwood feel this ungracious behavior, and so earnestly did she despise her daughter-in-law for it, that on the arrival of the latter she would have quitted the house forever, had not the entreaty of her eldest girl induced her first to reflect on the propriety of going, and her own tender love for all her 3 children determined her afterwards to stay, and for their sakes avoid a breach with their brother. A little hydration there. Also, welcome in, Gasman. Eleanor, the eldest daughter, whose advice was so effectual, possessed a strength of understanding and coolness of judgment which qualified her, though only 19, to be the counselor of her mother, and enabled her frequently to counteract, to the advantage of them all, the eagerness of mind in Mrs. Dashwood, which must generally have led to imprudence. She had an excellent heart. Her disposition was affectionate, and her feelings were strong, but she knew how to govern them. It was a knowledge which her mother had yet to learn, and which one of her sisters had resolved never to be taught. Marianne's abilities were, in many respects, quite equal to Eleanor's. She was sensible and clever, but eager in everything. Her sorrows, her joys, could have no moderation. She was generous, amiable, interesting. She was everything but prudent. The resemblance between her and her mother was strikingly great. Eleanor saw with concern the excess of her sister's sensibility, but by Mrs. Dashwood it was valued and cherished. They encouraged each other now in the violence of their affliction. The agony of grief, which overpowered them at first, was voluntarily renewed, was sought for, was created again and again. They gave themselves up wholly to their sorrow, seeking increase of wretchedness in every reflection that could afford it, and resolved against ever admitting consolation in future. Eleanor, too, was deeply afflicted, but still she could struggle, she could exert herself. She could consult with her brother, could receive her sister-in-law on her arrival, and treat her with proper attention, and could strive to rouse her mother to similar exertion, and encourage her to similar forbearance. Margaret, the other sister, was a good humored, well disposed girl, but as she had already imbibed a good deal of Marianne's romance without having much of her sense, she did not, at 13, bid fair to equal her sisters at a more advanced period of life. Well, that was chapter 1. It's interesting too. This particular novel has these little notes along the margin. I wonder what they say. It almost could read Sense, perhaps, or Lewis, or Sensibility. Sense, so Eleanor is Sense, Marianne is Sensibility. That would make sense. All right. Well, if you're not here before today, you might not be familiar, but between chapters, I tend to remind everyone to hydrate, caffeinate, grab a snack, do whatever it is that you need to settle in and enjoy the story. I'm anticipating probably 5 chapters today, maybe 6. I mean, that was 20 minutes for one. We could probably cook through quite a bit, actually. We shall see. All right. We're on to the next chapter, which, why are you acting like that? Hold on. Let's see. Let's see, recording format MP4 may not support chapter markers. Please select a hybrid form. In OBS Studio, recording output settings. Interesting and weird, and I'm gonna screenshot that and figure that out later. Wah wah. I don't know. File, new, do not save. Paste. Pasta. And we'll have to figure that out another day. It's above my pay grade. They don't tell you when you start VTubing. PNG, Live 2D, or 3D, it does not matter. They do not tell you all of the separate things that are interconnected. Do you choose stream elements, or do you choose OBS? Do you choose VideoTube, or do you do PNG Tuber Plus? Do you choose, like, every selection you choose, you have multiple options, and different people have different thoughts on what matters or what is of value. And I just noticed that my PNG tuber is slightly askew, so that's fun. Let's fix that. Wah wah. Hey, there we go. Nobody said anything. Yeah, if there's not technical problems, is it even VTubing? I don't know. It raises an interesting question. Set that over there. Okay, so all right. So this edition of Sense and Sensibility, I don't believe has the images in it, at least not from the edition that I have the cover from. So when and where they apply, I'll be sure to showcase those. There were none appropriate for the first chapter. Okay. Mhm. Chapter 2. Mrs. John Dashwood now installed herself mistress of Norland, and her mother and sisters-in-law were degraded to the condition of visitors. As such, however, they were treated by her with quiet civility, and by her husband with as much kindness as he could feel towards anybody beyond himself, his wife, and their child. He really pressed them with some earnestness to consider Norland as their home, and as no plan appeared so eligible to Mrs. Dashwood as remaining there till she could accommodate herself with a house in the neighbourhood, his invitation was accepted. A continuance in a place where everything reminded her of former delight was exactly what suited her mind. In seasons of cheerfulness, no temper could be more cheerful than hers, or possess in a greater degree that sanguine expectation of happiness, which is happiness itself. But in sorrow she must be equally carried away by her fancy, and as far beyond consolation as in pleasure, she was beyond alloy. Mrs. John Dashwood did not at all approve of what her husband intended to do for his sisters, to take £3,000 from the fortune of their dear little boy would be impoverishing him to the most dreadful degree. She begged him to think again on the subject. How could he answer it to himself to rob his child, and his only child too, of so large a sum? And what possible claim could the Miss Dashwoods, who were related to him only by half-blood, which she considered as no relationship at all, have on his generosity to so large an amount? It was very well known that no affection was ever supposed to exist between the children of any man by different marriages, and why was he to ruin himself and their poor little Harry by giving away all his money to his half-sisters? "It was my father's last request to me," replied her husband, "that I should assist his widow and daughters. He did not know what he was talking of, I dare say, 10 to 1, but he was light-headed at the time. Had he been in his right senses, he could not have thought of such a thing as begging you to give away half your fortune from your own child. He did not stipulate for any particular sum, my dear Fanny. He only requested me in general terms to assist them, and make their situation more comfortable than it was in his power to do. Perhaps it would have been as well if he had left it wholly to myself. He could hardly suppose I should neglect them, but as he required the promise, I could not do less than give it. At least I thought so at the time. The promise therefore was given and must be performed. Something must be done for them, whenever they leave Norland and settle in a new home. Well then, let something be done for them, but that something need not be £3,000. Consider," she added, "that when the money is once parted with, it can never return. Your sisters will marry, and it will be gone forever, if indeed it could ever be restored to our poor little boy." "Why, to be sure," said her husband very gravely, "that would make a great difference. The time may come when Harry will regret that so large a sum was parted with. If he should have a numerous family, for instance, it would be a very convenient addition." "To be sure, it would." "Perhaps then it would be better for all parties if the sum were diminished one half. £500 would be a prodigious increase to their fortunes. Oh, beyond anything great, what brother on earth would do half so much for his sisters, even if really his sisters? And as it is, only half-blood, but you have such a generous spirit." "I would not wish to do anything mean," he replied. "One had rather on such occasions do much than too little." "Do too much than too little. No one, at least, can think I have not done enough for them, even themselves. They can hardly expect more. Hey, kitten. There is no knowing what they may expect, said the lady, but we are not to think of their expectations. The question is what you can afford to do. Certainly, and I think I may afford to give them 500 pounds apiece. As it is, without any addition of mine, they will each have above 3,000 pounds on their mother's death, a very comfortable fortune for any young woman. To be sure it is, and indeed it strikes me that they can want no addition at all. They will have 10,000 pounds divided amongst them. If they marry, they will be sure of doing well, and if they do not, they may all live very comfortably together on the interest of 10,000 pounds. That is very true, and therefore I do not know whether upon the whole it would not be more advisable to do something for their mother while she lives rather than for them. Something of the annuity kind, I mean. My sisters would feel the good effects of it as well as herself. 100 a year would make them all perfectly comfortable. His wife hesitated a little, however, in giving her consent to the plan. To be sure, to be sure, said she, it is better than parting with 1,500 pounds at once, but then if Mrs. Dashwood should live 15 years, we shall be completely taken in. 15 years, my dear Fanny, her life cannot be worth half that purchase. Certainly not. But if you observe, people always live forever when there is any annuity to be paid them, and she is very stout and healthy and hearty and hardly 40. Rude. Also, thank you for the head pats. And hardly 40. I don't know how I feel about that. Hardly 40. My goodness. Mm-hmm. An annuity is a very serious business. It comes over and over every year, and there is no getting rid of it. You are not aware of what you are doing. I have known a great deal of the trouble of annuities, for my mother was clogged with the payment of 3 to old superannuated servants by my father's will, and it is amazing how disagreeable she found it. Thrice every year these annuities were to be paid, and then there was the trouble of getting it to them, and then one of them was said to have died, and afterwards it turned out to be no such thing. My mother was quite sick of it. Her income was not her own, she said, with such perpetual claims on it, and it was the more unkind in my father, because otherwise the money would have been entirely at my mother's disposal, without any restriction whatever. It has given me such an abhorrence of annuities that I am sure I would not pin myself down to the payment of one for all the world. It is certainly an unpleasant thing, replied Mr. Dashwood, to have those kind of yearly drains on one's income. One's fortune, as your mother justly says, is not one's own. To be tied down to the regular payment of such a sum on every rent day is by no means desirable. It takes away one's independence. Undoubtedly. And after all, you have no thanks for it. They think themselves secure, you do no more than what is expected, and it raises no gratitude at all. If I were you, whatever I did should be done at my own discretion entirely. I would not bind myself to allow them anything yearly. It may be very inconvenient some years to spare 100 or even 50 pounds from our own expenses. I believe you are right, my love. It will be better that there should be no annuity in the case. Whatever I may give them occasionally will be of far greater assistance than a yearly allowance, because they would only enlarge their style of living if they felt sure of a larger income, and would not be sixpence the richer for it at the end of the year. It will certainly be much the best this way. Much it certainly be much the best way. A present of £50 now and then will prevent their ever being distressed for money, and will, I think, be amply discharging my promise to my father. Wow. Wow, she's got him completely wrapped around her finger and completely manipulated him out of the promise that he made to his father. Gross. To be sure it will. Indeed, to say the truth, I am convinced within myself that your father had no idea of your giving them any money at all. The assistance he thought of, I dare say, was only such as might be reasonably expected of you. For instance, such as looking out for a comfortable small house for them, helping them to move their things, and sending them presents of fish and game, and so forth, whenever they are in season. I'll lay my life that he meant nothing further. Indeed, it would be very strange and unreasonable if he did. Do but consider, my dear Mr. Dashwood, how excessively comfortable your mother-in-law and her daughters may live on the interest of £7,000, besides the £1,000 belonging to each of the girls, which brings them to £50 a year apiece. And of course, they will pay their mother for their board out of it. Altogether, they will have 500 a year amongst them. And what on earth can 4 women want for more than that? They will live so cheap. Their housekeeping will be nothing at all. They will have no carriage, no horses, and hardly any servants. They will keep no company and have no expenses of any kind. Only conceive how comfortable they will be. 500 a year. I'm sure I cannot imagine how they will spend half of it. And as to your giving them more, it is quite absurd to think of it. They will be much more able to give you something. Upon my word, said Mr. Dashwood, I believe you are perfectly right. My father certainly could mean nothing more by his request to me than what you say. I clearly understand it now, and I will strictly fulfill my engagement by such acts of assistance and kindness to them as you have described. When my mother removes into another house, my services shall be readily given to accommodate her as far as I can. Some little present of furniture, too, may be acceptable then. Certainly, returned Mrs. John Dashwood, but however, one thing must be considered. When your father and mother moved to Norland, though the furniture of Stan Hill was sold, all the china, plate, and linen was saved, and is now left to your mother. Her house will therefore be almost completely fitted up as soon as she takes it. That is a material consideration, undoubtedly, a valuable legacy indeed, and yet some of the plate would have been a very pleasant addition to our own stock here. Yes, and the set of breakfast china is twice as handsome as what belongs to this house. A great deal too handsome, in my opinion, for any place they can ever afford to live in. But, however, so it is. Your father thought only of them, and I must say this, that you owe no particular gratitude to him, nor attention to his wishes, for we very well know that if he could, he would have left almost everything in the world to them. This argument was irresistible. It gave to his intentions whatever of decision was wanting before, and he finally resolved that it would be absolutely unnecessary, if not highly indecorous, to do more for the widow and children of his father than such kind of neighborly acts as his own wife pointed out. What a witch! What an absolute bleep word! Wow. Wow. Yep, she's selfish. She is like, oh, they're only your half-sisters. They don't count. Only it's your father's second wife and widow, and even though he asked you to provide and take care of them, they don't matter. You can just put them up in a house somewhere, and they can live off their savings into perpetuity. Oh, of course. Lato, thank you for the for like lurking. That's great. I appreciate it. Um, we are between chapters. Give me a second here. Okay, let's see. Grab my water. We are, I think we're a little bit ways away. Ah, here we go. One of the images. This is her speaking to the new Lord Dashwood, his wife, Mrs. Dashwood, and their son on her lap. I cannot imagine how they will spend half of it, reasoning that the $500 that they're supposed to live on will be more than enough for a house without, you know, horses or servants or anything of the kind. Never mind that they were living in a house with all of those luxuries and now are expected to have none of them, and then followed by, if these are women that have to go out into society, they have to have a coach. They have to be able to go to dances and balls and tea and other societal events in order for them to meet with these eligible bachelors that they could potentially marry. Wow, what a wicked woman, honestly. Absolutely wicked woman. Okay. Well, here we are between chapters. As a reminder, hydrate, caffeinate, grab a snack. Um, is my head pads working? I think so. Testing. Huh. They should be there, but they are not. Ah, I got it. I fixed it. I've seen the message, but I wasn't seeing the reaction. Is it working now? Where is it? Dun dun dun. Oh, there it is. Hooray! It's working now. We fixed it. Yeah, let's go. We fixed the head pads. Okay. All right. So this is the grandfather that passed away, with his, of course, his little son. I don't know what he's doing here. I'm not entirely sure why he is holding what may be some kind of whip. I'm guessing something he uses for like a horse. I don't know. It's very strange. But this is one of the drawings by Hugh Thompson. So pen and ink, possibly etched, like scratched into the surface of a copper plate and then inked and then rolled onto the paper so it would absorb, kind of. Let's see. It's kind of hard to tell, sight unseen, but the hatch marks back and forth, crisscrossing over each other, create a sense of value and depth to the painting. So we have the grandfather here with a book, and then I'm guessing the mother, the daughter, so that would be daughter-in-law, and his grandson, perhaps. I don't know. This might be later in the book, methinks, but this was the first image that came up in the references. So, we are on to chapter 3. We can definitely read the next chapter before we have to go on an ad break. For those of you not aware of my methods, I try to do between like 15 to 20 minutes prior to 6 p.m. Eastern time, 2 o'clock for me. I try to do about 2 ads worth of information or ads prior to streaming, so that way we have more flexibility when we have to do an ad, because I would prefer, if at all possible, that nobody would have to see ads, but it is what it is. So I try to get those out of the way before we start right on the nose. So if you guys are ever running late and don't get here until right at 6 p.m. Eastern, that's totally fine, because all you'll have missed is ads. All right. We're on to Sense and Sensibility, Chapter 3. Do a little quick stretch. Little hydration. Of course. Yes. Mrs. Dashwood remained at Norland several months, not from any disinclination to move when the sight of every well-known spot ceased to raise the violent emotion which it produced for a while. For when her spirits began to revive, and her mind became capable of some other exertion than that of heightening its affliction by melancholy remembrances, she was impatient to be gone, and indefatigable, my goodness, what a word, indefatigable, indefatigable, there we go, indefatigable, it's so hard to say, indefatigable in her inquiries for a suitable dwelling in the neighborhood of Norland, for to remove far from that beloved spot was impossible. But she could hear of no situation that at once answered her notions of comfort and ease, and suited the prudence of her eldest daughter, whose steadier judgment rejected several houses as too large for their income, which her mother would have approved. Mrs. Dashwood had been informed by her husband of the solemn promise on the part of his son in their favor, which gave comfort to his last earthly reflections. She doubted the sincerity of this assurance no more than he had doubted it himself, and she thought of it for her daughter's sake with satisfaction, though, as for herself, she was persuaded that a much smaller provision than £7,000 would support her in affluence, for their brother's sake, too. For the sake of his own heart she rejoiced, and she reproached herself for being unjust to his merit before, in believing him incapable of generosity. His attentive behavior to herself and his sisters convinced her that their welfare was dear to him, and for a long time she firmly relied on the liberality of his intentions. The contempt which she had very early in their acquaintance felt for her daughter-in-law was very much increased by the further knowledge of her character, which half a year's residence in her family afforded. And perhaps, in spite of every consideration of politeness, of maternal affliction on the side of the former, the two ladies might have found it impossible to have lived together so long, had not a particular circumstance occurred to give still greater eligibility, according to the opinions of Mrs. Dashwood, to her daughter's continuance at Norland. This circumstance was a growing attachment between her eldest girl and the brother of Mrs. John Dashwood, a gentlemanlike and pleasing young man, who was introduced to their acquaintance soon after his sister's establishment at Norland, and who had since spent the greatest part of his time there. Some mothers might have encouraged the intimacy from motives of interest, for Edward Ferrars was the eldest son of a man who had died very rich, and some might have repressed it from motives of prudence, for example, a trifling sum. Thank you for the head pats. The whole of his fortune depended on the will of his mother, but Mrs. Dashwood was alike uninfluenced by either consideration. It was enough for her that he appeared to be amiable, that he loved her daughter, and that Elinor returned the partiality. It was contrary to every doctrine of hers that difference of fortune should keep any couple asunder, who were attracted by resemblance of disposition, and that Elinor's merit could not be acknowledged by everyone who knew her, was to her comprehension impossible. Edward Ferrars was not recommended to their good opinion by any peculiar graces of person or address. He was not handsome, and his manners required intimacy to make them pleasing. He was too diffident to do justice to himself. But when his natural shyness was overcome, his behavior gave every indication of an open, affectionate heart. His understanding was good, and his education had given it solid improvement, but he was neither fitted by abilities nor disposition to answer the wishes of his mother and sister, who longed to see him distinguished as they hardly knew what. They wanted him to make a fine figure in the world in some manner or other. His mother wished to interest him in political concerns, to get him into Parliament, or to see him connected with some of the great men of the day. Mrs. John Dashwood wished it likewise, but in the meanwhile, till one of these superior blessings could be attained, it would have quieted her ambition to see him driving a barouche. But Edward had no turn for great men or barouches. All his wishes centered in domestic comfort and the quiet of private life. Fortunately, he had a younger brother who was more promising. Edward had been staying several weeks in the house before he engaged much of Mrs. Dashwood's attention, for she was at that time in such affliction as rendered her careless of surrounding objects. Also, welcome in, Small Town Writer D and Space Circus. She saw only that he was quiet and unobtrusive, and she liked him for it. He did not disturb the wretchedness of her mind by ill-timed conversation. She was first called to observe and approve him farther by a reflection which Elinor chanced one day to make on the difference between him and his sister. It was a contrast which recommended him most forcibly to her mother. "It is enough," said she. "To say that he is unlike Fanny is enough. It implies everything amiable. I love him already." "I think you will like him," said Elinor, "when you know more of him." "Like him," replied her mother, with a smile. I can feel no sentiment of approbation inferior to love." "You may esteem him." "I have never yet known what it was to separate esteem and love." Mrs. Dashwood now took pains to get acquainted with him. Her manners were attaching, and soon banished his reserve. She speedily comprehended all his merits. The persuasion of his regard for Elinor perhaps assisted her penetration, but she really felt assured of his worth, and even the quietness of manner which militated against all her established ideas of what a young man's address ought to be was no longer uninteresting when she knew his heart to be warm and his temper affectionate. No sooner did she perceive any symptom of love in his behavior to Elinor than she considered their serious attachment as certain, and looked forward to their marriage as rapidly approaching. "In a few months, my dear Marianne," said she, "Elinor will in all probability be settled for life. We shall miss her, but she will be happy." "Oh, mamma, how shall we do without her?" My love, it will be scarcely a separation. We shall live within a few miles of each other, and shall meet every day of our lives. You will gain a brother, a real, affectionate brother. I have the highest opinion in the world of Edward's heart. But you look grave, Marianne. Do you disapprove your sister's choice?" "Perhaps," said Marianne. "I may consider it with some surprise. Edward is very amiable, and I love him tenderly. But yet he is not the kind of young man. There is something wanting. His figure is not striking. It has none of that grace which I should expect in the man who would seriously attach my sister. That who in the man who could seriously attach my sister. His eyes want all that spirit, that fire which at once announce virtue and intelligence. And besides all this, I am afraid, mamma, he has no real taste. Music seems scarcely to attract him, and though he admires Eleanor's drawings very much, it is not the admiration of a person who can understand their worth. It is evident, in spite of his frequent attention to her while she draws, that in fact he knows nothing of the matter. He admires as a lover, not as a connoisseur. To satisfy me, those characters must be united. I could not be happy with a man whose taste did not in every point coincide with my own. He must enter into all my feelings. The same books, the same music must charm us both. Oh, mamma, how spiritless, how tame was Edward's manner in reading to us last night. I felt for my sister most severely, yet she bore it with so much composure. She seemed scarcely to notice it. I could hardly keep my seat. To hear those beautiful lines, which have frequently almost driven me wild, pronounced with such impenetrable calmness, such dreadful indifference. Marianne is a twat. Wow. The man, for me, has to like everything that I like. Oh my goodness. What an absurd. Well, she's what, 16, I think? Eleanor, the oldest, is 19. Jeez. Yeah, Marianne is woefully out of touch. He would certainly have done more justice to simple and elegant prose. I thought so at the time, but you would give him Cowper. Nay, mamma, if he is not to be animated by Cowper, but we must allow for a difference of taste. Eleanor has not my feelings, and therefore she may overlook it, and be happy with him. But it would have broke my heart had I loved him, to hear him read with so little sensibility. Mamma, the more I know of the world, the more am I convinced that I shall never see a man whom I can really love. I require so much. He must have all Edward's virtues, and his person and manners must ornament his goodness with every possible charm. Remember, my love, that you are not 17. It is yet too early in life to despair of such an happiness. Such an happiness? Weird phrasing. It is yet too early in life to despair of such an happiness. Why should you be less fortunate than your mother? In one circumstance only, my Marianne, may your destiny be different from hers. And with that, we have finished another chapter. You know, honestly, they're kind of quick. They're very wordy on the page, and the font is very, very small, but the chapters themselves are quite quick. But, let's see. That was 3 chapters, 20 pages, in a little over an hour. And what amounts to being, let's see, there are quite a few chapters. A total of, math that out real quick, 30, that is 40, 49 chapters, 50 chapters, for a total of 50 chapters. Okay, I'm going to try and read one more, and then we'll go on an ad break, and then we'll see where we're at after that. Whew. Okay. We're on to chapter 4. What a pity it is, Eleanor, said Marianne, that Edward should have no taste for drawing. No taste for drawing, replied Eleanor. Why should you think so? He does not draw himself, indeed, but he has great pleasure in seeing the performances of other people. And I assure you, he is by no means deficient in natural taste, though he has not had opportunities of improving it. Had he ever been in the way of learning, I think he would have drawn very well. He distrusts his own judgment in such matters so much that he is always unwilling to give his opinion on any picture, but he has an innate propriety and simplicity of taste, which in general direct him perfectly right. Marianne was afraid of offending, and said no more on the subject, but the kind of approbation which Eleanor described as excited in him by the drawings of other people was very far from the rapturous delight which, in her opinion, could alone be called taste. Yet, though smiling within herself at the mistake, she honored her sister for that blind partiality to Edward which produced it. I hope, Marianne, continued Eleanor, you do not consider him as deficient in general taste. Indeed, I think I may say that you cannot, for your behavior to him is perfectly cordial. And if that were your opinion, I am sure you could never be civil to him. I am sure you could never be civil to him. Marianne hardly knew what to say. She would not wound the feeling of her sister on any account, and yet to say what she did not believe was impossible. At length she replied, "Do not be offended, Eleanor, if my praise of him is not in everything equal to your sense of merits. I have not had so many opportunities of estimating the miniature had so many opportunities of estimating the miniature propensities of his mind, his inclinations and tastes, as you have. But I have the highest opinion in the world of his goodness and sense. I think him everything that is worthy and amiable." Bold recovery, Marianne. "I am sure," replied Eleanor with a smile, "that his dearest friends could not be dissatisfied with such commendation as that." "I do not perceive how you could express yourself more warmly." Marianne was rejoiced to find her sister so easily pleased. "Of his sense and his goodness," continued Eleanor, "no one can, I think, be in doubt who has seen him often enough to engage him in unreserved conversation. The excellence of his understanding and his principles can be concealed only by the shyness which too often keeps him silent. You know enough of him to do justice to his solid worth, but of his miniature propensities, as you call them, you have from peculiar circumstances been kept more ignorant than myself. He and I have been at times thrown a good deal together, while you have been wholly engrossed on the most affectionate principle by my mother. I have seen a great deal of him, have studied his sentiments, and heard his opinion on subjects of literature and taste, and upon the whole I venture to pronounce that his mind is well informed, his enjoyment of books exceedingly great, his imagination lively, his observation just and correct, and his taste delicate and pure. His abilities in every respect improve as much upon acquaintance as his manners and person. At first sight his address is certainly not striking, and his person can hardly be called handsome, till the expression of his eyes, which are uncommonly good, and the general sweetness of his countenance is perceived. At present, I know him so well that I think him really handsome, or at least almost so. What say you, Marianne?" "I shall very soon think him handsome, Eleanor, if I do not now. When you tell me to love him as a brother, I shall no more see imperfection in his face than I now do in his heart. Eleanor started at this declaration, and was sorry for the warmth she had been betrayed into in speaking of him. She felt that Edward stood very high in her opinion. She believed the regard to be mutual, but she required greater certainty of it to make Marianne's conviction of their attachment agreeable to her. She knew that what Marianne and her mother conjectured one moment, they believed the next. That with them to wish was to hope, and to hope was to expect. She tried to explain the real state of the case to her sister. I do not attempt to deny, said she, that I think very highly of him, that I greatly esteem, that I like him. Marianne here burst forth with indignation. Esteem him? Like him? Cold-hearted Eleanor. Oh, worse than cold-hearted, ashamed of being otherwise, use those words again, and I will leave the room this moment. Oh, wow. Tora, you brought, oh my goodness. Hello, raiders. Hi. Hi. It's a spacey raid. Whoop whoop. A spacey Tora raid. Oh my goodness. Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. I am Vexing Cat. If you're not familiar with my content, I am a tiger librarian. I primarily read classic literature and poetry. Currently, I'm reading Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. We just got started. We're in chapter 4, I believe. Welcome in, raiders. I was already here. I guess I'm double here now. Well, welcome in regardless. Thank you for the, what was that? My goodness. Day, you followed. Oh my goodness. Thank you for the follow, Day. If you guys have not seen, Spacey Tora and Day VTuber are some of the most incredible artists that I get to follow on on stream regularly. You guys have got to see their work. Let me go ahead and throw some shout outs to them. You guys have to see it. It's true, it's true. So shout out. Let's see if I did that correctly. Hopefully. There we go. Your old model.
Spacey, how do you back at the car?
Run. I'm guessing that's Tears of the Kingdom. I'm not positive on all of the Zelda games.
Can I do this part first before you die? I didn't think.
Oh,
I didn't think it was reverse. Please, I beg you. Please let me do this. I wasted a bottle on this. I can't.
It has been a while. It's so cute,
okay,
though.
Thank you. Thank you.
I am rather partial to Link's hat. That looks so cute. It was so long ago. You know, honestly, the Twitch guru that pulls these, let's see, do another shout out here for Day as well. The application that pulls these clips, I'm not even really sure where it's pulling the data from. It's so wild to me. You guys have to see. If you're not already following Spacey Tora, you should. Another tiger streamer, variety streamer, amazing artist, great game content. I forget what it's there's the one that they've been playing recently where they're like a lawyer, and I cannot for the life of me recall what it is called, but I've watched hours of that. Also, when they play Pikmin, it's so cute. But they have a live, I think it's a live 2D model, technically. I'm bad with Ace Attorney. Yes, that's the one. Amazing model. It's chibi, and the eyes are so beautiful, and they stare into your soul, and they just make you want to just pinch her little cheeks. Yes. Anyway, you guys also have to check out Day. Let's see what random clip it pulls for Day. So Day is another amazing variety streamer. Oh, look, that's half the crew right there.
Oh my god. This one right here doesn't?
Oh,
Yeah,
lethal
that just leads
company.
to a room we already have. There is a
Very
door
cute.
in that room, though, that doesn't lead back around. Oh. I have a flashlight now.
Was there a mine there?
I'm gonna
Was
pick
there
up
a
the
mine
box
there?
that
Well, my hands are full now.
Oh no, I'm so concerned. But Day has done some amazing artwork and amazing, like, they make emotes, they make art, they do amazing art live streams, they play games, amazing community that, like, all those folks, especially the Australians that are part of that group, are hilarious, and I love watching their content. Just some of the nicest people. So if you're not already following Day, check out their content. If you're not already following Spacey Tora, check out their content. So also welcome everyone. Thank you for the follows. We've got Day, we've got Ruthia, Graf Vitnia. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, so you'll have to apologize. I'm sorry. I'll have to apologize for mispronouncing that. But I'm gonna go with Graf Vitnia, probably Icelandic, perhaps. Yes, we are currently reading Sense and Sensibility, Chapter 4, and I'll get back to it. But thank you all. Be sure to take care of yourselves. Tora, hydrate, caffeinate, take care of yourself. Do whatever you need to settle in, and thank you for sharing your community with me and my community, the Libro Files. I appreciate it. Okay, we are on that first page. Eleanor could not help laughing. "Excuse me," said she, "and be assured that I meant no offense to you by speaking in so quiet a way of my own feelings. Believe them to be stronger than I have declared. Believe them, in short, to be such as his merit and the suspicion. The hope of his affection for me may warrant without imprudence or folly. But further than this you must not believe. I am by no means assured of his regard for me. There are moments when the extent of it seems doubtful. And till his sentiments are fully known, you cannot wonder at my wishing to avoid any encouragement of my own partiality, by believing or calling it more than it is. In my heart I feel little, scarcely any doubt of his preference, but there are other points to be considered besides his inclination. He is very far from being independent. What his mother really is, we cannot know. But from Fanny's occasional mention of her conduct and opinions, we have never been disposed to think her amiable. And I am very much mistaken if Edward is not himself aware that there would be many difficulties in his way if he were to wish to marry a woman who had not either a great fortune or high rank. Marianne was astonished to find how much the imagination of her mother and herself had outstripped the truth. "And you really are not engaged to him," said she. "Yet it certainly soon will happen. But two advantages will proceed from this delay. I shall not lose you so soon, and Edward will have greater opportunity of improving that natural taste for your favorite pursuit, which must be so indispensably necessary to your future felicity. Oh, if he should be so far stimulated by your genius as to learn to draw himself, how delightful it would be." Eleanor had given her real opinion to her sister. She could not consider her partiality for Edward in so preposterous a state as Marianne had believed it. There was at times a want of spirits about him, which, if it did not denote indifference, spoke a something almost as unpromising, a doubt of her regard. Supposing him to feel it, need not give him more than inquietude. It would not be likely to produce the dejection of mind which frequently attended him, A more reasonable cause might be found in the dependent situation which forbade? I'm guessing forbade, which forbade the indulgence of his affection. She knew that his mother neither behaved to him so as to make his home comfortable at present, nor to give him any assurance that he might form a home for himself without strictly attending to her views for his aggrandizement. My goodness. With such a knowledge as this, it was impossible for Eleanor to feel easy on the subject. She was far from depending on that result of his preference of her, which her mother and sister still considered as certain. Nay, the longer they were together, the more doubtful seemed the nature of his regard, and sometimes, for a few painful minutes, she believed it to be no more than friendship. Oof. But, whatever might really be its limits, it was enough. When perceived by his sister to make her uneasy, and at the same time, which was still more common, to make her uncivil, she took the first opportunity of affronting her mother-in-law on the occasion, talking to her so expressively of her brother's great expectations, of Mrs. Farrar's resolution that both her sons should marry well, and of the danger attending any young woman who attempted to draw him in, that Mrs. Dashwood could neither pretend to be unconscious nor endeavor to be calm. She gave her an answer which marked her contempt, and instantly left the room, resolving that whatever might be the inconvenience or expense of so sudden a removal, her beloved Eleanor should not be exposed another week to such insinuations. In this state of her spirits, a letter was delivered to her from the post, which contained a proposal particularly well timed. It was the offer of a small house, on very easy terms, belonging to a relation of her own, a gentleman of consequence and property in Devonshire. The letter was from this gentleman himself, and written in the true spirit of friendly accommodation. He understood that she was in need of a dwelling, and though the house he now offered was merely a cottage, he assured her that everything should be done to it which she might think necessary, if the situation pleased her. He earnestly pressed her, after giving the particulars of the house and garden, to come with her daughters to Barton Park, the place of his own residence, from whence she might judge herself whether Barton Cottage, for the houses were in the same parish, could by any alteration be made comfortable to her. He seemed really anxious to accommodate them, and the whole of his letter was written in so friendly a style as could not fail of giving pleasure to his cousin, more especially at a moment when she was suffering under the cold and unfeeling behavior of her nearer connections. She needed no time for deliberation or inquiry. Her resolution was formed as she read. The situation of Barton in a county so far distant from Sussex as Devonshire, which but a few hours before would have been a sufficient objection to outweigh every possible advantage belonging to the place, was now its first recommendation. She wanted to put some distance between her and Mrs. Dashwood. Makes sense. To quit the neighborhood of Norland was no longer an evil. It was an object of desire. It was a blessing in comparison of the misery of continuing her daughter-in-law's guest. And to remove forever from that beloved place would be less painful than to inhabit or visit it while such a woman was its mistress. She instantly wrote Sir John Middleton her acknowledgment of his kindness and her acceptance of his proposal, and then hastened to shew both letters to her daughters, that she might be secure of their approbation before her answer were sent. Eleanor had always thought it would be more prudent for them to settle at some distance from Norland than immediately amongst their present acquaintance. On that head, therefore, it was not for her to oppose her mother's intention of removing into Devonshire. The house, too, as described by Sir John, was on so simple a scale, and the rent so uncommonly moderate, as to leave her no right of objection on either point. And therefore, though it was not a plan which brought any charm to her fancy, though it was a removal from the vicinity of Norland beyond her wishes, she made no attempt to dissuade her mother from sending her letter of acquiescence. And on that note, a couple of hellos. Almontis, welcome in. Casman, you're still here. I'm so glad. And of course, Day. I'm thankful for your acquaintance, and getting to see your art has been such an inspiration to me. You and I. Aw, hello. Got the little Quran emote there. Hal's, welcome in. Hello, hello. Another amazing artist. I don't know. Yeah, I've seen a couple clips now that I think about it. You guys, if you're not familiar with Howls is this cute little dog VTuber. Oh my goodness. Howls. There we go. I'm not sure if that's gonna work or not, but we shall try. I'm guessing the shout out bot did not like it. Sorry, Hals. So we'll just do, good old fashioned shout out. There we go. Hey, it worked that time. Yeah, it is a show nickname only. Oh, good to know. You're very welcome, Hals. You guys, if you don't get a chance to, check out Hals's content. Amazing dog VTuber, talented artist. I've seen a couple of streams of theirs, and I know them from the Tiger Fae community. Another amazing tiger streamer. Almontis, I'm assuming you must have finished your stream. You had a collab today, so thank you for stopping in. Please make sure you're taking care of yourself, hydrating, caffeinating, do whatever it is you need to take care of yourself. I'm rambling. We are at a point right now we probably need to run an ad. So, thank you for the pats. So before we start with chapter 5, let's run a 3-minute ad. I'll use the restroom. When I come back, we'll get cooking on the next few chapters. So, hang tight, everyone. I will be right back. Okay, and we are back. So, real quick hydration. And we'll get started on reading chapter 5 of Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. Yeah, thanks, Hals. Oh, clicking things. Clicking the wrong thing. Shh, you saw nothing. Oh, man. One of these days. Chapter 5. No sooner was her answer dispatched than Mrs. Dashwood indulged herself in the pleasure of announcing to her son-in-law and his wife that she was provided with a house, and should incommode them no longer than till everything were ready for her inhabiting it. They heard her with surprise. Mrs. John Dashwood said nothing, but her husband civilly hoped that she would not be settled far from Norland. She had great satisfaction in replying that she was going into Devonshire. Edward turned hastily towards her on hearing this, and in a voice of surprise and concern, which required no explanation to her, repeated, "Devonshire? Are you indeed going there, so far from hence? Into what part of it?" She explained the situation. It was within 4 miles northward of Exeter. "It is but a cottage," she continued, "but I hope to see many of my friends in it. A room or two can easily be added, and if my friends find no difficulty in travelling so far to see me, I am sure I will find none in accommodating them." She concluded with a very kind invitation to Mr. and Mrs. John Dashwood to visit her at Barton, and to Edward she gave one with still greater affection. Though her late conversation with her daughter-in-law had made her resolve on remaining at Norland no longer than was unavoidable, it had not produced the smallest effect on her in that point to which it principally tended. To separate Edward and Eleanor was as far from being her object as ever, and she wished to shew Mrs. John Dashwood by this pointed invitation to her brother how totally she disregarded her disapprobation of the match. Mr. John Dashwood told his mother again and again how exceedingly sorry he was that she had taken an house and... Oh, it's so weird. Old English from a couple hundred years ago is just weird. Exceeding sorry he was that she had taken an house at such a distance from Norland as to prevent his being of any service to her in removing her furniture. He really felt conscientiously vexed on the occasion, for the very exertion to which he had limited the performance of his promise to his father was by this arrangement rendered impracticable. The furniture was all sent round by water. It chiefly consisted of household linen, plate, china, and books, with an handsome pinafore of Marianne's. Mrs. John Dashwood saw the package depart with a sigh. She could not help feeling it hard that, as Mrs. Dashwood's income would be so trifling in comparison with her own, she should have any handsome article of furniture. Welcome in, Venatrix. Also, enjoy the emotes. Mrs. Dashwood took the house for a 12-month. It was ready furnished, and she might have immediate possession. No difficulty arose on either side in the agreement, and she waited only for the disposal of her effects at Norland, and to determine her future household before she set off for the West. And this, as she was exceedingly rapid in the performance of everything that interested her, was soon done. The horses which were left her by her husband had been sold soon after his death, and an opportunity now offering of disposing of her carriage, she agreed to sell that likewise at the earnest advice of her eldest daughter. For the comfort of her children, had she consulted only her own wishes, she would have kept it. But the discretion of Eleanor prevailed. Her wisdom, too, limited the number of their servants to 3, 2 maids and a man, with whom they were speedily provided from amongst those who had formed their establishment at Norland. The man and one of the maids were sent off immediately into Devonshire to prepare the house for their mistress's arrival. For, as Lady Middleton was entirely unknown to Mrs. Dashwood, she preferred going directly to the cottage to being a visitor at Barton Park, and she relied so undoubtingly on Sir John's description of the house as to feel no curiosity to examine it herself till she entered it as her own. Her eagerness to be gone from Norland was preserved from diminution by the evident satisfaction of her daughter-in-law in the prospect of her removal, a satisfaction which was but feebly attempted to be concealed under a cold invitation to her to defer her departure. Now was the time when her son-in-law's promise to his father might with particular propriety be fulfilled, since he had neglected to do it on first coming to the estate. Their quitting his house might be looked on as the most suitable period for its accomplishment. But Mrs. Dashwood began shortly to give over every hope of the kind, and to be convinced, from the general drift of his discourse, that his assistance extended no further than their maintenance for 6 months at Norland. He so frequently talked of the increasing expenses of housekeeping, and of the perpetual demands upon his purse which a man of any consequence in the world was beyond calculation exposed to, that he seemed rather to stand in need of more money himself than to have any design of giving money away. In a very few weeks from the day which brought Sir John Middleton's first letter to Norland, everything was so far settled in their future abode as to enable Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters to begin their journey. Many were the tears shed by them in their last adieus to a place so much beloved. "Dear, dear Norland," said Marianne, as she wandered alone before the house, on the last evening of their being there. "When shall I cease to regret you? When learn to feel a home elsewhere? Oh, happy house! Could you know that what I suffer in now viewing you from this spot, from whence perhaps I may view you no more? And you, ye well-known trees, but you will continue the same. No leaf will decay because we are removed, nor any branch become motionless, although we can observe you no longer. No, you will continue the same, unconscious of the pleasure or the regret you occasion, and insensible of any change in those who walk under your shade, but who will remain to enjoy you." Marianne, oh my goodness. She is something else. Okay, we are on to chapter 6. So, as a reminder, hydrate, caffeinate, grab a snack, do whatever you need to enjoy the reading. And to all of you wonderful raiders that are still here, thank you for sticking around. All right. We are on to chapter 6. The first part of their journey was performed in too melancholy a disposition to be otherwise than tedious and unpleasant. But as they drew towards the end of it, their interest in the appearance of a country which they were to inhabit overcame their dejection, and a view of Barton Valley as they entered it gave them cheerfulness. It was a pleasant, fertile spot, well wooded and rich in pasture. After winding along it for more than a mile, they reached their own house. A small green court was the whole of its demesne in front, and a neat wicket gate admitted them into it. Sense and Sensibility, so there is such a thing. Hi. Hi, Bremo. Brem MC. Welcome in. It's been a minute. As a house, Barton Cottage, though small, was comfortable and compact. But as a cottage, it was defective, for the building was regular, the roof was tiled, the window shutters were not painted green, nor were the walls covered with honeysuckles. A narrow passage led directly through the house into the garden behind. On each side of the entrance was a sitting room, about 16 feet square, and beyond them were the offices and the stairs. 4 bedrooms and 2 garrets formed the rest of the house. It had not been built many years, and was in good repair in comparison of Norland. It was poor and small indeed. But the tears which recollection called forth as they entered the house were soon dried away. They were cheered by the joy of the servants on their arrival, and each for the sake of the others resolved to appear happy. It was very early in September. The season was fine, and from first seeing the place under the advantage of good weather, they received an impression in its favor, which was of material service in recommending it to their lasting approbation. She's rather fond of that word. The situation of the house was good. High hills rose immediately behind, and at no great distance on each side, some of which were open downs. Open down. High hills rose. What does an open down hill look like? I don't think I've ever seen that before. Don't know. It gave me a bunch of answers for like road cross or motocross or mountain biking. I don't know. Strange. High hills rose immediately behind, and at no great distance on each side, some of which were open downs, the others cultivated and woody. The village of Barton was chiefly on one of these hills, and formed a pleasant view from the cottage windows. The prospect in front was more extensive. It commanded the whole of the valley, and reached into the country beyond. The hills which surrounded the cottage terminated the valleys in that direction, under another name and in another course. It branched out again between 2 of the steepest of them. With the size and furniture of the house, Mrs. Dashwood was upon the whole well satisfied. For though her former style of life rendered many additions to the latter indispensable, yet to add and improve was a delight to her, and she had at this time ready money enough to supply all that was wanted of greater elegance to the apartments. As for the house itself, to be sure, said she, it is too small for our family, but we will make ourselves tolerably comfortable for the present, as it is too late in the year for improvements. Perhaps in the spring, if I have plenty of money, as I dare say I shall, we may think about building. These parlors are both too small for such parties of our friends as I hope to see often collected here, and I have some thoughts of throwing the passage into one of them, with perhaps a part of the other, and so leave the remainder of that other for an entrance. This was a new drawing room, which may be easily added. This, with a new drawing room, which may be easily added, and a bedchamber and garret above, will make it a very snug little cottage. I could wish the stairs were handsome, but one must not expect everything. Though I suppose it would be no difficult matter to widen them, I shall see how much I am beforehand with the world in the spring, and we will plan our improvements accordingly. Downland, are just open hills. The South Downs is an area here that's made up of chalk hills, just lightly grassed, no forests or anything built up. Oh, the more you know. Thank you for that info, Colin. In the meantime, till all these alterations could be made from the savings of an income of 500 a year by a woman who never saved in her life, they were wise enough to be contented with the house as it was, and each of them was busy in arranging their particular concerns and endeavoring by placing around them their books and other possessions to form themselves a home. Marianne's pianoforte was unpacked and properly disposed of, and Eleanor's drawings were affixed to the walls of their sitting room. Your GCSE geography coursework finally paying off. The more you know. In such employments as these, they were interrupted, soon after breakfast the next day, by the entrance of their landlord, who called to welcome them to Barton, and to offer them every accommodation from his own house and garden in which theirs might at present be deficient. Sir John Middleton was a good-looking man about 40. He had formerly visited at Stanhill, but it was too long ago for his young cousins to remember him. His countenance was thoroughly good-humoured, and his manners were as friendly as the style of his letter. Their arrival seemed to afford him real satisfaction, and their comfort to be an object of real solicitude to him. He said much of his earnest desire of their living on the most sociable terms with his family, and pressed them so cordially to dine at Barton Park every day till they were better settled at home, that though his entreaties were carried to a point of perseverance beyond civility, they could not give offence. His kindness was not confined to words, for within an hour after he left, a large basket full of garden stuff and fruit arrived from the park, which was followed before the end of the day by a present of game. He insisted, moreover, on conveying all their letters to and from the post for them, and would not be denied the satisfaction of sending them his newspaper every day. Lady Middleton had sent a very civil message by him, denoting her intention of waiting on Mrs. Dashwood as soon as she could be assured that her visit would be no inconvenience. And as this message was answered by an invitation equally polite, her ladyship was introduced to them the next day. They were, of course, very anxious to see a person on whom so much of their comfort at Barton must depend, and the elegance of her appearance was favourable to their wishes. Lady Middleton was not more than 6 or 7 and 20. Her face was handsome, her figure tall and striking, and her address graceful. Her manners had all the elegance which her husbands wanted. Orimi, thank you for the follow. But they would have been improved by some share of his frankness and warmth, and her visit was long enough to detract something from their first admiration, by shewing that, though perfectly well-bred, she was reserved, cold, and had nothing to say for herself beyond the most commonplace inquiry or remark. Conversation, however, was not wanted, for Sir John was very chatty, and Lady Middleton had taken the wise precaution of bringing with her their eldest child, a fine little boy about 6 years old, by which means there was one subject always to be recurred to by the ladies in case of extremity, for they had to inquire his name and age, admire his beauty, and ask him questions, which his mother answered for him, while he hung about her and held down his head. To the great surprise of her ladyship, who wondered at his being so shy before company, as he could make noise enough at home, on every formal visit a child ought to be of the party, by way of provision for discourse. In the present case, it took up 10 minutes to determine whether the boy was most like his father or mother, and in what particular he resembled either. For of course everybody differed, and everybody was astonished at the opinion of the others. An opportunity was soon to be given to the Dashwoods of debating on the rest of the children, as Sir John would not leave the house without securing their promise of dining at the park the next day. That is a lot of little guys there. The Ronan Mari comfy. Aw, it's so cute. The little blankets. We love it. We love the comfy. All right. As we are between chapters, friendly reminder to myself and to all of you, be sure to stay hydrated. That is the last of my Smart Water with passion fruit and mango. It was quite good. My favorite from that brand is actually a dandelion flavored. It's very refreshing. But regular water will suffice. We are on to chapter 7. Chapter 7. Barton Park was about half a mile from the cottage. The ladies had passed near it on their way along the valley, but it was screened from their view at home by the projection of an oven hill. Every time. Ugh. The house was large and handsome, and the Middletons lived in a style of equal hospitality and elegance. The former was for Sir John's gratification, the latter for that of his lady. They were scarcely ever without some friends staying with them in the house, and they kept more company of every kind than any other family in the neighborhood. It was necessary, to the happiness of both, for however dissimilar in temper and outward behavior, they strongly resembled each other in that total want of talent and taste which confined their employments, unconnected with such as society produced, within a very narrow compass. Sir John was a sportsman, Lady Middleton a mother. He hunted and shot, and she humored her children, and these were their only resources. Lady Middleton had the advantage of being able to spoil her children all the year round, while Sir John's independent employments were in existence only half the time. Continual engagements at home and abroad, however, supplied all the deficiencies of nature and education, supported the good spirits of Sir John, and gave exercise to the good breeding of his wife. Lady Middleton piqued herself upon the elegance of her table and of all her domestic arrangements, and from this kind of vanity was her greatest employment in any of their parties. But Sir John's satisfaction in society was much more real. He delighted in collecting about him more young people than his house would hold, and the noisier they were, the better was he pleased. He was a blessing to all the juvenile part of the neighborhood, for in summer he was forever forming parties to eat cold ham and chicken out of doors, and in winter his private balls were numerous enough for any young lady who was not suffering under the insatiable appetite of 15. The arrival of a new family in the country was always a matter of joy to him, and in every point of view He was charmed with the inhabitants he had now procured for his cottage at Barton. I didn't expect so many people to show up for story time. It must be a really good book. Richter, it is. To be fair, it is a very good book. Aw, and a very good reader. Thank you. Cold ham. Yes, cold ham. My goodness. The Miss Dashwoods were young, pretty, and unaffected. It was enough to secure his good opinion, for to be unaffected was all that a pretty girl could want to make her mind as captivating as her person. The friendliness of his disposition made him happy in accommodating those whose situation might be considered, in comparison with the past, as unfortunate. In shewing kindness to his cousins, therefore, he had the real satisfaction of a good heart, and in settling a family of females only in his cottage, he had all the satisfaction of a sportsman. For a sportsman, though he esteems only those of his sex who are sportsmen likewise, is not often desirous of encouraging their taste by admitting them to a residence within his own manor. I think that translates to, while he himself likes to be a sportsman, hunting and whatnot, he doesn't want to have other individuals to compete with within the vicinity of his own manor, is what I'm interpreting that long-winded paragraph to mean. To his benefit, because they are ladies, they will not be stealing his game, I guess. Fair enough. Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters were met at the door of the house by Sir John, who welcomed them to Barton Park with unaffected sincerity, and as he attended them to the drawing-room, repeated to the young ladies the concern which the same subject had drawn from him the day. Which the same subject had drawn from him the day before, at being unable to get any smart young men to meet them. They would see, he said, only one gentleman there besides himself, a particular friend who was staying at the park, but who was neither very young nor very gay. He hoped they would all excuse the smallness of the party, and could assure them it should never happen so again. He had been to several families that morning in hopes of procuring some addition to their number, but it was moonlight, and everybody was full of engagements. Luckily, Lady Middleton's mother had arrived at Barton within the last hour, and as she was a very cheerful, agreeable woman, he hoped the young ladies would not find it so very dull as they might imagine. The young ladies, as well as their mother, were perfectly satisfied with having two entire strangers of the party, and wished for no more. Mrs. Jennings, Lady Middleton's mother, was a good-humoured, merry, fat, elderly woman who talked a great deal, seemed very happy, and rather vulgar. In about 30 years, goals. Fat, happy, vulgar. Sure. She was full of jokes and laughter, and before dinner was over had said many witty things on the subject of lovers and husbands, hoped they had not left their hearts behind them in Sussex, and pretended to see them blush whether they did or not. Marianne was vexed at it for her sister's sake, and turned her eyes towards Eleanor to see how she bore these attacks, with an earnestness which gave Eleanor far more pain than could arise from such commonplace raillery as Mrs. Jennings. Colonel Brandon, the friend of Sir John, seemed no more adapted by resemblance of manner to be his friend than Lady Middleton was to be his wife, or Mrs. Jennings to be Lady Middleton's mother. He was silent and grave. His appearance, however, was not unpleasing, in spite of his being in the opinion of Marianne and Margaret, an absolute old bachelor, for he was on the wrong side of 35. But though his face was not handsome, his countenance was sensible, and his address was particularly gentlemanlike. So 35 is an old bachelor. Oh my goodness. What was the life expectation at that time that 35 was old? At 40, their mother of 40 is old. Oh my goodness. Oh, my poor heart. Oh no. There was nothing in any of the party which could recommend them as companions to the Dashwoods. But the cold insipidity of Lady Middleton was so particularly repulsive that in comparison of it, the gravity of Colonel Brandon and even the boisterous mirth of Sir John and his mother-in-law was interesting. Lady Middleton seemed to be roused to enjoyment only by the entrance of her 4 noisy children after dinner, who pulled her about, tore her clothes, and put an end to every kind of discourse except what related to themselves. Welcome in, Bean. Thanks for the follow. Oh, thank you. I thought you had already. My apologies, but thank you. In the evening, as Marianne was discovered to be musical, she was invited to play. The instrument was unlocked, everybody prepared to be charmed, and Marianne, who sang very well at their request, went through the chief of the songs, which Lady Middleton had brought into the family on her marriage, and which perhaps had lain ever since in the same position on the pianoforte. For her ladyship had celebrated that event by giving up music, although her mother's account she had played extremely well. I don't know why it posted that twice. How strange. Huh. Okay. Weird. By her mother's account, she had played extremely well, and by her own very fond of it. And by her own was very fond of it. Marianne's performance was highly applauded. Sir John was loud in his admiration at the end of every song, and as loud in his conversation with the others while every song lasted. Lady Middleton frequently called him to order, wondered how anyone's attention could be diverted from music for a moment, and asked Marianne to sing a particular song, which Marianne had just finished. Colonel Brandon alone, of all the party, heard her without being in raptures. He paid her only the compliment of attention, and she felt a respect for him on the occasion which the others had reasonably forfeited by their shameless want of taste. His pleasure in music, though it amounted not to the ecstatic delight which alone could sympathize with her own, was estimable when contrasted against the horrible insensibility of the others. And she was reasonable enough to allow that a man of 35 might well have outlived all acuteness of feeling and every exquisite power of enjoyment. She was perfectly disposed to make every allowance for the colonel's advanced state of life, which humanity required. He's 35, the advanced stage of life. I need a drink. The way this is written, oh my god. Oh, my poor heart is so broken. Oh my goodness. Jane, you make us seem so old. Jet's beverage. My goodness. I don't know that one, but oh my goodness. My goodness, my goodness, my goodness. Yep. Yep. She Jane is actively trying to break my heart, I think. Let's read at least one, maybe two. This was written in 1797, I believe. It wasn't published until 1811. 1797. She was born in 1775. Do the math. So she was 22. She was 22 when she originally wrote it, and it was published. Do some quick math. It wasn't published until she was 35. So fairly a little bit longer. I wonder if she ever thought about that at 5 and 30, that, oh yeah, I'm finally publishing my book, and now we're geriatric and we shall surely die. It's just yes. Well, as I am one for not shying away from my own age, I don't know. I still feel like I have another lifetime by this comparison. It's just, I don't know. 40's the new 50 and blah blah blah, or whatever it is. 40's the new 30. That's, I think, how that goes. I don't know. Shenanigans. Ah, the hags are indeed loved. The youngest, I don't know about the youngest librarian I know. I have to think about that. I'm pretty sure the one in my local library, there's two. One who's definitely older, and then one of the gals, she's quite a bit younger. I think she's in her 20s. She got her library degree. Oh my goodness. Ah, thank you for the head pats. All right. So we are on to chapter 8. Mrs. Jennings was a widow with an ample jointure. She had only 2 daughters, both of whom she had lived to see respectably married, and she had now therefore nothing to do but to marry all the rest of the world. One of those. In the promotion of this object, she was zealously active, as far as her ability reached, and missed no opportunity of projecting weddings among all the young people of her acquaintance. She was remarkably quick in the discovery of attachments, and had enjoyed the advantage of raising the blushes and the vanity of many a young lady by insinuations of her power over such a young man. And this kind of discernment enabled her soon after her arrival at Barton decisively to pronounce that Colonel Brandon was very much in love with Marianne Dashwood. She rather suspected it to be so on the very first evening of their being together, and when listening so attentively while she sang to them. From his listening so attentively while she sang to them, and when the visit was returned by the Middletons dining at the cottage, the fact was ascertained by his listening to her again. It must be so. She was perfectly convinced of it. It would be an excellent match, for he was rich and she was handsome. Mrs. Jennings had been anxious to see Colonel Brandon well married ever since her connection with Sir John first brought him to her knowledge, and she was always anxious to get a good husband for every pretty girl. The immediate advantage to herself was by no means inconsiderable, for it supplied her with endless jokes against them both. At the park she laughed at the Colonel, and in the cottage at Marianne. To the former, her raillery was probably, as far as it regarded only himself, perfectly indifferent. But to the latter, it was at first incomprehensible, and when its object was understood, she hardly knew whether most to laugh at its absurdity or censure its impertinence, for she considered it an unfeeling reflection on the Colonel's advanced years and on his forlorn condition as an old bachelor. Mind you, Marianne is 16 and he is 35. Ick. Mrs. Dashwood, who could not think a man 5 years younger than herself, so exceedingly ancient as he appeared to be to the youthful fancy of her daughter, ventured to clear Mrs. Jennings from the probability of wishing to throw ridicule on his age. But at least, mamma, you cannot deny the absurdity of the accusation. Though you may not think it intentionally ill-natured, Colonel Brandon is certainly younger than Mrs. Jennings, for he is old enough to be my father. Old enough to be my father. And if he were ever animated enough to be in love, must have long outlived every sensation of the kind. It is too ridiculous. When is a man to be safe from such wit, if age and infirmity will not protect him? Infirmity? Right? Infirmity, said Eleanor. Do you call Colonel Brandon infirm? I can easily suppose that his age may appear much greater to you than to my mother, but you can hardly deceive yourself as to his having the use of his limbs. Did you not hear him complain of the rheumatism, and is not that the commonest infirmity of declining life? I'm gonna throttle this child. My dearest child, said her mother, laughing, at this rate you must be in continual terror of my decay, and it must seem to you a miracle that my life has been extended to the advanced age of 40. You tell her. Mamma, you are not doing me justice. I know very well that Colonel Brandon is not old enough to make his friends yet apprehensive of losing him in the course of nature. He may live 20 years longer. But 35 has nothing to do with matrimony. Well, you heard it here, folks. At 55, we all expire, apparently. According to Marianne. My goodness. Perhaps, said Eleanor, 35 and 17 had better not have anything to do with matrimony together. But if there should by any chance happen to be a woman who is single at 7 and 20, I should not think Colonel Brandon being 35 any objection to his marrying her. I concur. A woman of 7 and 20, said Marianne, after pausing a moment, can never hope to feel or inspire affection again. And I said, bitch. Oh my God, this kid. Said Marianne, after pausing a moment, can never hope to feel or inspire affection again, and if her home be uncomfortable, or her fortune small, I can suppose that she might bring herself to submit to the offices of a nurse, for the sake of the provision and security of a wife. In his marrying such a woman, therefore, there would be nothing unsuitable. It would be a compact of convenience, and the world would be satisfied. In my eyes, it would be no marriage at all, but that would be nothing. To me, it would seem only a commercial exchange in which each wished to be benefited at the expense of the other. It would be impossible, I know, replied Eleanor, to convince you that a woman of 7 and 20 could feel for a man of 35 anything near enough to love to make him a desirable companion to her. But I must object to your dooming Colonel Brandon and his wife to the constant confinement of a sick chamber, merely because he chanced to complain yesterday, a very cold, damp day, of a slight rheumatic feel in one of his shoulders. But he talked of flannel waistcoats, said Marianne, and with me a flannel waistcoat is invariably connected with aches, cramps, rheumatisms, and every species of ailment that can afflict the old and the feeble. Yeah, we're doing a shot. This kid is my goodness. I've never been driven to drink before on stream, but my god, this kid. Let's try. Had he been only in a violent fever, you would not have despised him half so much. Confess, Marianne. Is not there something interesting to you in the flushed cheek, hollow eye, and quick pulse of a fever? Soon after this, upon Eleanor's leaving the room, Mamma, said Marianne, I have an alarm on the subject of illness, which I cannot conceal from you. I am sure Edward Ferrars is not well. We have now been here almost a fortnight, and yet he does not come. Nothing but real indisposition could occasion this extraordinary delay. What else can detain him at Norland? Had you any idea of his coming so soon? Said Mrs. Dashwood. I had none. On the contrary, if I have felt any anxiety at all, a lot of A's, a lot of alliteration. On the contrary, if I have felt any anxiety at all on the subject, it would have been in recollecting that he sometimes shewed a want of pleasure and readiness in accepting my invitation. When I talked of his coming to Barton, does Eleanor expect him already? I have never mentioned it to her, but of course she must. I rather think you are mistaken, for when I was talking to her yesterday of getting a new grate for the spare bedchamber, she observed that there was no immediate hurry for it, as it was not likely that the room would be wanted for some time. How strange this is! What can be the meaning of it? But the whole of their behavior to each other has been unaccountable. How cold, how composed were their last adieus, how languid their conversation the last evening of their being together. In Edward's farewell there was no distinction between Eleanor and me. It was the good wishes of an affectionate brother to both. Twice did I leave them purposely together in the course of the last morning, and each time did he most unaccountably follow me out of the room. And Eleanor, in quitting Norland and Edward, cried not as I did. Even now her self-command is invariable. When is she dejected or melancholy? When is she dejected or melancholy? When does she try to avoid society or appear restless and dissatisfied in it? Yeah, Marianne. Yep. No sense. None whatsoever. Flights of fancy. Pure girlish flights of fancy. That's just drivel. Her head is just full of cotton candy and dreams and butterflies. Just, there's no sense knocking around in there. All right. It is 1:30 the hour. I'm going to read one more today, and then after that I'll see where we are, because I really don't want to have to do another ad if at all possible. So then we'll find somebody to raid. I'm not sure who's on right now. A few people, I imagine. I'll take a peek now while I'm thinking about it. Neither. You're listening to music under this category, and you are celebrating National Book Day in a reptile room. Okay, maybe not. Warhammer, Street Fighter, Lord of the Rings, Return to Moria. Good game. Special event. Just chatting. marbles fall out. I don't know. We might find an art streamer to go raid, I think. Will depend. I really should start keeping track of um, when last I rated someone. That would be nice. It looks like Asim is doing an event. Melissa's one. Gary's doing one. Melissa, I'm only sleeping. That is a category. Okay, the more you know. All right. Chapter 9. There we go. Chapter 9. The Dashwoods were now settled at Barton with tolerable comfort to themselves. The house and the garden, with all the objects surrounding them, were now become familiar, and the ordinary pursuits, which had given to Norland half its charms, were engaged in again with far greater enjoyment than Norland had been able to afford since the loss of their father. Sir John Middleton, who called on them every day for the first fortnight, and who was not in the habit of seeing much occupation at home, could not conceal his amazement on finding them always employed. Their visitors, except those from Barton Park, were not many, for in spite of Sir John's urgent entreaties that they would mix more in the neighborhood, and the repeated assurances of his carriage being always at their service, the independence of Mrs. Dashwood's spirit overcame the wish of society for her children, and she was resolute in declining to visit any family beyond the distance of a walk. There were but few who could be so classed, and it was not all of them that were attainable. About a mile and a half from the cottage, along the narrow winding valley of Allenham, which issued from that of Barton, as formerly described, the girls had, in one of their earliest walks, discovered an ancient, respectable-looking mansion, which, by reminding them a little of Norland, interested their imagination, and made them wish to be better acquainted with it. But they learnt, on inquiry, that its possessor, an elderly lady of very good character, was unfortunately too infirm to mix with the world, and never stirred from home. The whole country about them abounded in beautiful walks, the high downs, which invited them from almost every window of the cottage to seek the exquisite enjoyment of air on their summits, were a happy alternative when the dirt of the valleys beneath shut up their superior beauties. And towards one of these hills did Marianne and Margaret one memorable morning direct their steps, attracted by the partial sunshine of a showery sky, and unable longer to bear the confinement which the settled rain of the 2 preceding days had occasioned. The weather was not tempting enough to draw the 2 others from their pencil and their book. In spite of Marianne's declaration that the day would be lastingly fair, and that every threatening cloud would be drawn off from their hills, and the two girls set off together. They gaily ascended the downs, rejoicing in their own penetration at every glimpse of blue sky, and when they caught in their faces the animated gales of an high southwesterly wind, they pitied the fears which had prevented their mother and Eleanor from sharing such delightful sensations. "Is there a felicity in the world," said Marianne, "superior to this? Margaret, we will walk here at least 2 hours." Margaret agreed, and they pursued their way against the wind, resisting it with laughing delight for about 20 minutes longer, when suddenly the clouds united over their heads, and a driving rain set full in their faces. Chagrined and surprised, they were obliged, though unwillingly, to turn back, for no shelter was nearer than their own house. One consolation, however, remained for them. to which the exigence? Exigence. I have not seen that word before. Exigence. I'm probably mispronouncing. Thank you, Valis. Exigency. So, exigencies, the need, demand, or requirement intrinsic to a circumstance or condition, a case or situation that demands prompt action or remedy, emergency. Exigency. Exigencies. Okay. One consolation, however, remained for them, to which the exigence of the moment gave more than usual propriety. It was that of running with all possible speed down the steep side of the hill, which led immediately to their garden gate. They set off. Marianne had at first the advantage, but a false step brought her suddenly to the ground, and Margaret, unable to stop herself to assist her, was involuntarily hurried along and reached the bottom in safety. A gentleman carrying a gun, with 2 pointers playing round him, was passing up the hill and within a few yards of Marianne when her accident happened. He put down his gun and ran to her assistance. She had raised herself from the ground, but her foot had been twisted in the fall, and she was scarcely able to stand. The gentleman offered his services, and perceiving that her modesty declined what her situation rendered necessary, took her up in his arms without further delay, and carried her down the hill. Then, passing through the garden, the gate of which had been left open by Margaret, he bore her directly into the house, whither Margaret was just arrived, and quitted not his hold till he had seated her in a chair in the parlour. Eleanor and her mother rose up in amazement at their entrance, and while the eyes of both were fixed on him with an evident wonder and a secret admiration, which equally sprung from his appearance, he apologized for his intrusion by relating its cause in a manner so frank and so graceful that his person, which was uncommonly handsome, received additional charms from his voice and expression. Had he been even old, ugly, and vulgar, the gratitude and kindness of Mrs. Dashwood would have been secured by any act of attention to her child. But the influence of youth, beauty, and elegance gave an interest to the action which came home to her feelings. She thanked him again and again, and with the sweetness of address which always attended her, invited him to be seated. But this he declined, as he was dirty and wet. Mrs. Dashwood then begged to know to whom she was obliged. His name, he replied, was Willoughby, and his present home was at Allenham, from whence he hoped she would allow him the honour of calling tomorrow to inquire after Miss Dashwood. The honour was readily granted, and he then departed to make himself still more interesting in the midst of every time Anne heavy rain. In the midst of an heavy rain, his manly beauty and more than common gracefulness were instantly the theme of general admiration, and the laugh which his gallantry raised against Marianne received particular spirit from his exterior attractions. Marianne herself had seen less of his person than the rest. For the confusion, For the confusion which crimsoned over her face on his lifting her up had robbed her of the power of regarding him after their entering the house. But she had seen enough of him to join in all the admiration of the others, and with an energy which always adorned her praise, his person and air were equal to what her fancy had ever drawn for the hero of a favorite story. And in his carrying her into the house with so little previous formality, there was a rapidity of thought which particularly recommended the action to her. Every circumstance belonging to him was interesting. His name was good, his residence was in their favorite village, and she soon found out that of all manly dresses, a shooting jacket was the most becoming. Her imagination was busy, her reflections were pleasant, and the pain of a sprained ankle was disregarded. Ah, that first love. Sir John called on them as soon as the next interval of fair weather that morning allowed him to get out of doors, and Marianne's accident being related to him, he was eagerly asked whether he knew any gentleman of the name of Willoughby at Allenham. "Willoughby!" cried Sir John. What is he in the country? That is good news. However, I will ride over tomorrow and ask him to dinner on Thursday." "You know him, then?" said Mrs. Dashwood. "Know him? To be sure I do. Why, he is down here every year." "And what sort of young man is he?" "As good a kind of fellow as ever lived, I assure you. A decent shot, and there is not a bolder rider in England. The perfect man to a sportsman." "And is that all you can say for him?" cried Marianne, indignantly. "But what are his manners on more intimate acquaintance? What his pursuits, his talents and genius?" Sir John was rather puzzled, as are we all. "Upon my soul," said he, "I do not know much about him as to all that. But he is a pleasant, good-humoured fellow, and has got the nicest little— Wow. Okay. But he is a pleasant, good-humoured fellow, and has got the nicest little black bitch of a pointer I ever saw. Was she out with him today?" But Marianne could do. Yeah. But Marianne could no more satisfy him as to the color of Mr. Willoughby's pointer than he could describe to her the shades of his mind. "But who is he?" said Eleanor. "Where does he come from? Has he a house at Allenham?" On this point Sir John could give more certain intelligence, and he told them that Mr. Willoughby had no property of his own in the country, that he resided there only while he was visiting the old lady at Allenham Court, to whom he was related, and whose possessions he was to inherit, adding, Yes, he is very well worth catching, I can tell you, Miss Dashwood. He has a pretty little estate of his own in Somersetshire besides, and if I were you, I would not give him up to my younger sister in spite of all this tumbling down hills. Miss Marianne must not expect to have all the men to herself. Brandon will be jealous if she does not take care." "I do not believe," said Mrs. Dashwood, with a good-humoured smile, "that Mr. Willoughby will be incommoded by the attempts of either of my daughters towards what you call catching him. It is not an employment to which they have been brought up. Men are very safe with us, let them be ever so rich. I am glad to find, however, from what you say, that he is a respectable young man, and one whose acquaintance will not be ineligible." "He is a good sort of fellow, I believe, as ever lived," repeated Sir John. "I remember last Christmas, at a little hop at the park, he danced from 8 o'clock till 4, without once sitting down." "Did he, indeed?" cried Marianne, with sparkling eyes. "And with elegance, with spirit?" "Yes, and he was up again at 8 to ride to covert." "That is what I like. That is what a young man ought to be. Whatever his pursuits, his eagerness in them should know no moderation, and leave him no sense of fatigue. I see how it will be, said Sir John. I see how it will be. You will be setting your cap at him now, and never think of poor Brandon. That is an expression, Sir John, said Marianne warmly, which I particularly dislike. I abhor every commonplace phrase by which wit is intended, and setting one's cap at a man, or making a conquest, are the most odious of all. Their tendency is gross and illiberal, and if their construction could ever be deemed clever, time has long ago destroyed all its ingenuity. Sir John did not much understand this reproof, but he laughed as heartily as if he did, and then replied, Ay, you will make conquests enough, I dare say, one way or other. Poor Brandon! He is quite smitten already, and he is very well worth setting your cap at, I can tell you, in spite of all this tumbling about and spraining of ankles. And on that note, oh, how absurd. My goodness. Okay, so that, I think that's a good point. Yeah, we'll copy that. So that is probably it for me today, I think. One, it's been a while since I've read, so my voice isn't 100%. But if you are not familiar with my content, this Sunday is my bi-weekly D&D game that's hosted by Valis here, one of the moderators, is the DM, and then a number of other folks. I'm not sure if Kitten is still here. Kitten for Cuddles, another streamer, primarily streams on YouTube. They're part of the party. We have a few folks. It's 6 players and one, the DM. You're very welcome. Yeah, it was eye-opening and entertaining. Particularly that last bit with, Lord Middleton's fascination with his dog. How odd. Anyway, sportsman be sporting, I guess. Let's find somebody to go raid and say hello. Because I don't want anyone here to have to deal with an ad for the next 10 minutes. Let's see. In the same category, has anything changed? No, it has not. But sort by, what do we have? We've got Palia, Atlas, talk shows and podcasts, No Man's Sky, Warhammer, Fallout, art. I kind of want to just hear Horatius sing when we raid him. I think that's what we'll go do. Horatius the Dwarf is another amazing streamer here on Twitch. He has I think it would be considered a 3D model. Don't quote me on that. I get a little squiffy between the 2D and 3D lines. They get a little blurred, if you know what I mean. But well, he's been up for 2 hours. I changed my mind. We will go bother Penny. Pork Buns is doing some drawing. I'm somebody's I think they're doing some cross generation, so like them and other streamers, what their progeny would be. So let's go visit them. They've only been streaming for a little over 40 minutes, so that would be a good one. That way you guys get to enjoy the stream and not have to worry about I've been lucking out. All my ads were under picture heads. Nice. Okay. Let's pop over to Penny. So hold on to your britches. Let's do a quick raid message. You're very welcome, Fallon. Leaving the library, hopefully with more sense than sensibility. Let's see. And one of these. Chat. All right, there's our raid message. And we will, yep, perfect, excellent. So I'll start the raid and then we'll all head over as soon as it lets us. All right. New friends, old friends, Librephiles, all. Thank you for enjoying the stream. And I hope to see you, if not this Sunday, then next week for more of Sense and Sensibility. Have a wonderful weekend and we'll see you soon.